Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming back. I hope you enjoyed lunch. As you can see, the Intercontinental Hotel does a pretty amazing job to be able to tear this room down, put your lunch up, tear it down again, and get everybody back in here. So thank you all for returning. I'm sorry we had to cut a little bit short the sessions we had prior to this, but our next guest has to catch a plane to almost as far as you can go in Latin America, down to Buenos Aires for the Egmont meetings. So we'll move this along quickly so that he doesn't have any issue with making his plane. So we're very honored and very proud. We always have this session. And as the keynote, we've always been very fortunate to have the FinCEN Director. So when FinCEN named a director who took office on December 1st of last year, we were a little nervous because it was a very short time period to try and explain who we were and why he needed to be here. But we were fortunate that we didn't have any of those issues, and he is here with us today. So I'd like to bring on stage the newly minted FinCEN Director, Ken Blanco. We got you a theme song, by the way.
Keep that in mind. No shield or hammer.
I was going to give you the shield from what I've been hearing from Andrea and others that you had to be worried about this session, but no, this is going to be fine. As I said, appreciate your coming here. Very relaxed setting. Fireside chat.
I like that.
So as you can see, we've prepared it for you. I want you to be comfortable.
I feel the warmth.
Good, excellent. We even had a theme song for you. I'm Coming Home by Daughtry.
This is my home,
this is your home.
It is.
So we welcome you back.
It's funny, earlier I was telling David that I was walking through the streets of Miami, and for better or for worse, I remembered many of the homicide scenes I went to as an ASA here in town, but the city certainly has grown. It is such a wonderful place. For those of you who live here, you're so lucky. It really is just a wonderful place. And for those of you who are visiting, I can't tell you enough what a wonderful place it is for you to visit, and it's just a great town, so I'm happy to be home.
Great. I'll start you with an easy one.
Sure.
Okay, because that's always the best way. Then we'll get into it. So, as I had said, you are the fairly newly installed Director of FinCEN, and that always brings an ask.
Yeah.
Because, as with your predecessor, you come from the Department of Justice.
I do.
So the banking industry is always curious. What does that mean for us, coming from the Department of Justice, and what is your view of the role of FinCEN? Regulation versus enforcement?
I don't think I have to choose. I think it's both. And I think I might come from a little bit different of a place than many of the former prosecutors came from. My role in many different ways already is what you guys are doing now, right, in the AML scene and also in the fight against terrorism. But there's also that economic background, too, that we had. I was fortunate, really lucky and honored to have been the AAG, the acting AAG, for almost a year and seeing what is done on the economic side of the fight against crime. That was important, I thought. And over the years of supervising and assisting with the AFMLs, or the anti-money laundering, and working with many of you here internationally, I don't think as the role of FinCEN Director I have to choose whether it's regulation or law enforcement. I think it's both. And frankly, I see all of you as partners. And I see this as a partnership moving forward. I think we need to innovate. I think we need to be clear in our regulations and our understandings of what we're asking you to do and why we're asking you to do it. I think you need to be clear in your feedback to us so that we can get better at what we do. So that's my vision as I move forward, particularly in the next year or so. I think we need to be aggressive. I think we need to be bold, both of us. But I also don't want there to be any confusion either. I think that you need to be held to your responsibilities, right, at the end of the day, and we all need to be held to our responsibilities. We have a responsibility to keep this financial sector clean and safe. We have a responsibility to protect this country, and we have a responsibility to protect our families, and that's what I see my role as FinCEN, and I think I bring with it 29 years of prosecutorial trial experience. And I got to tell you, in the 8 weeks that I've been in this role, I can't tell you how helpful that has been to me as I go through this process.
prosecutorial trial experience. Because you talked about a balance there between
Yeah.
regulation and enforcement, but you end it with how well your prosecutorial trial experience has served you. In what respect has that been helpful?
So I think just as a practical point, you know, and many of you who are lawyers out here, many of you who are trial lawyers, you know, it's easy to talk a big game when you're talking about the law, but when you actually have to prove your case, that's a different story, right, at the end of the day. And having done that process and knowing what it means to actually prove a case, at least in the criminal setting, that's important. And I think what it does is it sets the scene where you have to be really clear about what you're asking people to do. And you have to be very transparent when you issue regulations and when you talk about regulations, and you have to be and when you're issuing guidance. And that's one of the reasons I took this job. I thought that my background brought in here a sense of innovation, looking at it through a prosecutor's point of view, having dealt with regulations for the most part in the banking sector and also with the anti-money laundering stuff. I thought that coming over here and asking and providing transparency and guidance and clear guidance I thought was going to be important. And so I ended it with trial because that is my craft and that's what I've done for 29 years. But I think in that format I've learned that you have to be practical too. And for me, throughout the years, at least making decisions on criminal cases, it's never been a gotcha game, and that's not what we're asking for. It's not a gotcha game. But what we do want, and I think that what we can expect, is that people will understand their responsibilities and adhere to them and be held accountable when they don't. But at the end of the day, we also know that not everybody is perfect, right? And we're willing to work with people who are innovative. We're willing to work with people who put in the effort to understand what their responsibilities are.
Well, that's great to hear. Not everyone is perfect, and I'm sure
Everybody's
everybody
perfect.
out in this room will tell you that they are definitely not perfect. So
hey,
an
look,
even-handed
I'm not
approach is
perfect.
always good.
I think you have to. Look, I think we're all in this together, right? What you do and what we do in sort of the regulation setting is important. It's important to all of us. It's important to all of you because without those safeguards, without safeguarding the financial system, frankly, you're not going to have jobs either at the end of the day. And our financial system, for at least as far as I'm concerned, in this country and globally, because we are a global financial system, is important. You have to protect it. And protecting it protects your families and protects this country and protects countries that you come from as well, for those of you who are not from the United States. It really is important. It means jobs. It means clarity. It means moving your economies forward. It means protecting your families. All of us have families that we want to make sure we protect. So when we issue guidance and we talk about regulation in the AML sector and also in the terrorism sector, it means something to us. We just don't make it up. It's important. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. We don't always get it right. And that's why we often look to you, private industry, and we're going to look to you more and more and more for feedback. And we are really interested in hearing that feedback. But it's got to be feedback that makes sense and feedback that is consistent with what our priorities are in protecting the financial system. I think that's pretty basic. And I think you know, using that sort of as a guide, I think we can move forward.
You said you didn't see the video this morning.
I did not. First time you showed it to me just over on the side.
Well, only because you've mentioned two of the key themes in that video. Quote, all in this together, and partnership,
Yeah.
which was the main thrust of what we're trying to do here. We had yesterday the public-private sector dialogue.
It's important. That's
where
critical.
the main theme was that. We had Andrea on the hot seat, and so you know she did very well. She didn't have to phone a friend.
We have her on the hot seat every day, too, by the way, in FinCEN,
So
she's used to it.
So she gets training.
Yeah.
And I know this idea of partnership, you know, FIBA is very proud. We're on the Bank Secrecy Act Advisory Group, which I would suppose is the ultimate partnership. And as you said, it has to make sense. It has to have clarity. This past year, what we did here in the state of Florida, we were actually approached by the Office of Financial Regulation to modernize the international banking statutes. I don't know if that's happened before, or they've reached out to the trade association and said, let's work on this together. Do you envision that type of partnership when you're talking about you want feedback, you want input?
I do.
Do you envision that type of partnership?
Look, I mean, if you've got a creative idea and you've got creativity in the sense of a suggestion for partnership, I'm interested in hearing about it. I am. Look at the public-private partnership. I cannot tell you how much we've learned through that process. And I think many of you here, particularly my Mexican counterparts, who we've dealt in the private-public partnership for 6-7 years when I was at DOJ. And boy, what a difference it made, not only to our counterparts, but to us here in the United States, and listening how industry actually functions, right, and the practicalities behind it, and what we were trying to do, at least as far as the Department of Justice was concerned, and what our interests were. And not having that feedback was a problem. But getting it from private industry and from counterparts, not only domestic but international, was critical in a better understanding of where we should be at the end of the day. Look, at the end of the day, we may or may not agree, right? But having that discussion and floating those ideas and having the conversation to give it some thought, some real careful thought, I think that's important. And I think that's where the public-private balance comes in.
Right. And going a little deeper into that, in the idea of the public-private, because there are a lot of discussions around regulatory reform,
That's right.
modernization. There's a few bills that are floating around
That's right.
in Congress that are very specific
Yep.
in nature and not necessarily broad and all-encompassing, but there are proposals out there from industry.
Yeah.
And just to mention, start with one, which I
Yeah.
think is very interesting as an idea. I've actually spoken to people in law enforcement. I was told to say a high-ranking official in law enforcement.
So that's always important.
That told me that they were...
The anonymity of the
That's right.
high-ranking official.
That said they were very supportive
Yeah.
of this idea.
Oh, yeah.
And this was an idea that was carried in the memo that came from the clearinghouse.
Okay.
And it read as follows: facilitating the flow of raw data from financial institutions to law enforcement, including raw data about the parties to a transaction, transaction history, and information on other counterparties. Now this, of course, for the industry, would go far towards relieving or balancing out a lot of that burden if we were able to feed all of that data basically to law enforcement and say, here you go, you're the investigators, you're the ones that understand this better than anybody, have at it,
You think?
and then come back.
You think that it would be law enforcement that would understand that data better than anybody?
Is that a question?
That's a
or
question.
Is that a...
So look, I think that we need to think about it, right, at the end of the day. But I can see some problems in there, not only on the privacy side, right? But I think also what some people may be missing, at least on the law enforcement side, is the real experience oftentimes comes from many of you here in this room who look at that information up front. That's where some of the experience, a lot of the experience comes. You're the users and practical seers of that information. And you missing that step for law enforcement will be horrendous, I think, in my opinion, if you just send that raw data over. Really, the role that many of you in this room play to the security of this country is critical. It's important. So I'm not saying I won't listen to the raw data whole thing, but I'm telling you, all the hoops that are missing when you send that over, I just don't think that's a great idea. I just don't, at the end of the day. And the overwhelming amount of information that will be sent, I think would overwhelm law enforcement also. And for what? I mean, if we're saying that this is a partnership, if we're saying that we're doing this together, everybody needs to play their role. And I think just by shifting that responsibility over to law enforcement doesn't seem to me to be practical. Look, when we talk about ideas, all right, let me be really clear. When we talk about ideas, and I'm not saying this is a bad one, I'm happy to talk about it. But when we talk about ideas, they really have to be ideas that are workable for what we're trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve, folks, here is a secure financial system, a secure country, and security for families here in the United States and in elsewhere, right? Because it's a global economy. It's not just us. Now, using those three tenets, right, I'm happy to listen to any ideas. But when ideas begin to affect our effectiveness and our ability to carry out those three tenets, then I'm going to have a problem with it. But that doesn't mean there isn't a solution to every problem. There may be. But again, if we're all in this together, everybody has to have skin in the game at the end of the day.
Nobody's talking about abdicating
Sounds
responsibility.
that way.
No. All I'm saying is you're feeding them the data. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at it, because obviously we already have our systems in place, everything is set
David.
up. But they may see things
David,
that we don't see.
How much, once you press send, you will go back and look at that information? It's not going to happen. Look, human nature will tell you that. Look, happy to have, and as you can tell, it'll probably be a vibrant conversation about that issue, as most conversations with me and my staff are probably very vibrant. But look, understand the practicalities of what law enforcement does and can and cannot do, right? And by the way, everybody talks about the enormous resources of the federal government. No, there are limited resources in federal government, and we've got to be able to prioritize how it is that we approach this issue. This issue, by the way, for all of you here, and I don't think you'd be here if it wasn't so important, we're talking about anti-money laundering, we're talking about the fight against terrorism. That's important, folks. You cannot get away from addressing that issue, and all of you play an important role in it. And that's why we're willing to have this conversation. That's why we want to hear your feedback. But again, they have to be, they have to be innovative ideas and creative ideas that protect the whole reason we do this at the end of the day.
It would be vibrant on your side.
I think it would be vibrant
pretty
on this
much.
side too.
I think my wife could tell you I'd be very.
You'd be calm.
I'm pretty calm.
Yeah.
It's not going to rile me. At the end of the day, I'm not one of them anymore.
Yeah.
So
you don't think?
it's not directly impacting
You brought the hammer
what I have
out.
to
How
do.
could you not be one of them?
Notice I put the hammer away. I put the hammer away. I didn't want you to think it was going to get contentious. But no, I can understand what you're saying. But I think in a true partnership, it's not just the fact, we will analyze. We will look at that. It'll go through all of our systems. And as you know, banks are working on more innovative ways of analyzing data.
Yeah, some of which are very exciting, by the way. I mean,
and we'll come to that.
They really are.
And see how far we can go with it. But I think that law enforcement also, because rather than always having to come and ask, if they had the data at their disposal, this could help them go much farther in an investigation, or maybe it's something they're already working on, and now they can start to see patterns if they can put that data together. I mean, it's the same type of idea where after 9/11, all of our law enforcement computers need to be working together, IRS, et cetera, because maybe we would have caught something if we could have shared the data. So it's just that idea of sharing data. And again, now we're going to come towards that information sharing idea, that it's kind of along those lines, is the thought. So I'll come up and visit you.
I'm happy to share data. I'm happy to have others share data with each other. There's 314A and B, and we can talk about those. I mean, there are ways to do it, and we're interested and excited about listening to other ideas in that field, right? And one of them happens to be the raw data. But I'm just putting it out there that it sounds like a very easy solution. But sometimes they're not always easy solutions. Sometimes you really have to give it some thought, and you have to bring in sort of those, that kind of practical experience on everybody's side to make sure it is what we need to do to carry out and be effective in what we want to achieve at the end of the day.
Okay. We'll move on from that one. We'll save that one for another day.
Okay.
Maybe a year from now we can sit here and
maybe by the end of the year. Look, I'm on week 8.
Another area that gets a lot of conversation is, of course, the issue of the SAR filing, the CTR filing, the value of that, particularly under the thresholds that have been set. If you do talk to law enforcement, see, now I'm going to flip it, okay? Law enforcement will tell you they need every one of them. Because they'll tell you, quote unquote, they don't know what they don't know. Which is never a good answer for me. Is there a possibility of revisiting that and adjusting those levels to meet today's reality? Because we know we don't have Smurfs running around anymore depositing $9,000 in 10 different banks in Miami.
Well, they're smarter than that now, right? I mean, they're more sophisticated.
So given that scenario, can we revisit this idea of the threshold of SARs and CTRs, and is FinCEN looking at that?
We are. And I think we can, and I think we just need to be really practical about it. But one thing I think we really need to understand, I think, and I'm sure you all do, is that crime doesn't stay stagnant, right? And our laws and our regulations weren't meant to be stagnant either at the end of the day. So you're seeing different kinds of crime for which the thresholds would probably be better if they were lower, and others where they probably would be better if they were higher. And those things change. I mean, we have a very sophisticated criminal element out there. They really are. I mean, if you think all of you are sophisticated in the banking area, they are brilliant in many ways in what they're doing, not only in the cyber stuff, but just in what they're doing and how they're organizing the way they commit crimes and the reasons for which they commit crimes. One example is you can just see, and it's a horrible epidemic on the opioid side. It doesn't take a lot of money to get somebody addicted to opioids. It doesn't. It doesn't take a lot of money to move. It doesn't take a lot of money to move or pay your subordinates either on the opioid side. So when you talk about increasing the thresholds and making them higher, you're going to miss a lot on the bottom. And right now, and it's not just the Attorney General saying it, it's everybody who's saying it, that is a problem right now. You see families literally being destroyed because of the opioid epidemic. And it isn't just a certain group of people committing it. I mean, we have professionals who are involved as well committing opioid abuses. So we are looking at all the thresholds and all the reporting requirements. It's one of the exciting things I think that we should be doing along with you, talking to law enforcement and talking to private industry. Look, these reporting requirements, as I mentioned to you earlier, and these thresholds have to be practical. They really do. And we're going to rely a lot on what you have to say about that and a lot about what law enforcement has to say about it, because there's no sense in having these requirements if we're not using them or we're not putting them to effect. I can tell you I'm pleasantly surprised that, I shouldn't say surprised, I can see in a very significant way how we are using these reports that all of you are sending in and how these thresholds are working. And I'm happy to share those with you at another time. But they are important. They have to play a role. But we are interested in reevaluating them and talking about them. But I think it has to be, frankly, a reevaluation and analysis on a constant, ongoing basis, because crime changes. And once you go in one direction, the organized crime or whoever will go in another direction. So you have to be flexible, and you have to be able to foreshadow and see what's going to happen in the future. What if I do X, Y will happen? Well, you need to be ready for Y. You need to be ready for Y before it happens at the end of the day. And I think that we need to be there along with you guys in thinking that out.
Okay. I mean, the point, I guess, for us is obviously we're looking, where possible, to kind of relieve some of the burden.
Or better to focus it, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
Focus, or make it more efficient.
And make it more efficient,
obviously.
Right.
And because pretty much it's always been on the financial institutions, on the banks. You've used the famous geographic targeting orders, which of course we all know well in Miami, because I think we've been subjected to pretty much every one of them that has come out has been targeting Miami, finally expanding them to other areas. Yeah. And yes, now we have title insurers with reporting obligations for the cash transactions. So that was good to see somebody else being brought in.
Yeah.
Do you see, and not necessarily through obviously geographic targeting orders, but do you see other non-bank actors being brought in to the AML obligations?
So I got to tell you, just like everything else, right? I mean, we are taking a look at everything to see how we can make them more effective. So for me, everything's on the table. At the end of the day, I think that we look at different kinds of industries to determine whether or not they should be included in the geographical targeting orders. And if we think that there's a good reason to include them and we think that they will be effective at what we are trying to achieve, we're going to consider it. So look, again, I've been here 8 weeks. I think that it's all on the table. And it's for us to have a really good conversation about it. I think that we're learning a lot through these orders. And I think they're going to be pretty influential as we move forward.
And how about outside of the orders? Just in general, bringing other actors into the sphere, as we're seeing in Latin America. In many
Yeah.
countries in Latin America, they're passing legislation where
saw
they're
that.
requiring the private sector,
I saw that. I saw
non-banks, to also have compliance program, to have a compliance officer, whether they're import-export companies,
Yeah.
et cetera, auditors, attorneys. They're really bringing everybody into the
Yeah.
fold.
Yeah.
Much like
Yeah.
they passed CDD legislation
Yeah.
long before we did.
Right.
So can we see that trend moving here to where we're going to look more at to the private sector to assist in this fight?
Look, I want to learn from my counterparts who did this overseas. I can't tell you I'm an expert in what they've done, but I'm certainly happy to take a look at it and see what the practicalities are, learn from what they did well and what they didn't do well. But again, as I mentioned before, I'm all ears and I'm happy to listen and I'm happy to have good critical dialogue on that issue.
I'll call Mariano before you land.
I'll see him in
having
14 hours.
little conversation. But I think it's been very interesting how in some of the more, I'll use the term, malign jurisdictions,
Yeah.
Panama, Colombia, some of the Central American countries, that
Yeah.
they have pushed this legislation through. And they're focusing not just on implementing it,
Yeah.
but on training the private sector, something we've been doing also
Yeah.
in this area. Because it's more than just the banks. Yes, we see the raw data. We see the movement of funds. But for example, in trade-based money laundering, they see the movement of goods. They get the invoices.
do.
They understand what's happening there.
They do.
So
They
they'd probably be better equipped than we are in
So,
that.
David, one thing, for better or for worse, right? I mean, most of my practice was international for the last, 11 years or so. And one of the things that I learned is every country is different. Every country is different, and different countries need to organize their laws based on, what is happening there and their culture and what is accepted by their people and their legislature. So although I'm happy to take a look at what our counterparts have done, and I'm sure it's great, wonderful work, if it's something that'll work here, great. If it's something that's practical, I'm happy to listen. If it achieves what we want to achieve, then I'm happy to advocate for it. But again, because they've done it and because they're successful doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work here, and vice versa, by the way. I mean, just because we do something over here doesn't necessarily mean it'll work with our counterparts overseas, and we're very cognizant of that as well. But again, I'm happy to take a look at the successes that they've had and their failures, right? Because more often than not, you learn more from the failures than you do from your successes. But happy to take that into consideration. And by the way, this is not just me. I mean, I think you have a staff at FinCEN and a staff at Treasury that really is interested in new ideas and really is interested in, being innovative and thinking about what we've done over the last 20, 25 years and maybe how we can do it differently, how we can be more efficient, how we can be more effective, how we can be more impactful. And one of the reasons for that is maybe not, maybe we haven't been that creative in the last, 20, 30 years, I don't know. But I tell you, one of the things that sort of strikes me is that at the end of the day, we better. Because if we don't, we will be overwhelmed by the amount of crime and the amount of threats that all of you and me are going to face. So at the end of the day, we better think about what we're doing very carefully and how it is that we can be effective in what we do. It's just a fact of life. It's just a fact of life. For those of you who for better or for worse, I see or saw, particularly when I was at the department, what happens on a global setting. I see it. And let me tell you, we better be ready. We just better be ready.
Okay, moving to innovation.
Oh, great area.
Moving to innovation. Well, but first I'm going to hit you with a different kind of question. It's not a difficult question. What is your definition of virtual currency? What category do you feel that it falls in?
Let me tell you. So look, we have, and I will rely on what the guidance that we have provided in the past on virtual currency. And look, I would recommend that you look at that guidance very carefully, and that's where we are. Are we going to become more innovative? Yeah, I think we are. I think we're going to take a harder and closer look at it as it evolves. I think everybody here in this room is interested in virtual currency and the effects that it has, how it gets regulated, if it gets in the way it gets regulated, and by who, and the effect that it will have on the economy and on the financial system. So every day is a new learning experience, not only for me, but I think for many people in the virtual currency area. My recommendation to you is be engaged in that. We have working groups, and and Andrew, you can talk about that as well, that we've put together with many of our BSAG partners and with many people in the industry to talk about this. It is an important issue, that and sort of cybersecurity. All that is critical to us. So it's going to evolve, and what I can tell you is we are going to be engaged very much with private industry and how we move this forward. It is not an issue just that affects us here in the United States. It's an issue that affects everybody globally on how we address it, what it means, the clarity with which we define those issues, I think are going to be important for all of us. And so we're going to go through that process of figuring it out and evolving as we go through.
Okay, but the issue with virtual currency is we don't have any regulatory standard, any regulatory consistency, because we have different players
Depends on how you're
opining.
using it, right?
Right, exactly.
right.
I mean, we have the SEC on one side.
Yes, you do.
We know, told you we read
CFTC
everything.
on the other, you have us.
We have FinCEN sending letters to senators and also opining on the issue. They are regulated basically under the money transmitter laws.
Yep.
Under MSB, so they have to register.
If you're an right. If you're
Right.
an
Now we're actually working now with, again, the Office of Financial Regulation, and we've talked to the CSBS, who's given us guidance on trying to change that here in Florida, because we don't feel they fall under a money transmitter rule, that there should be a regulation specifically for virtual currency and virtual currency dealers, which might avoid some of these problems. And I know you say you're willing to listen, and I appreciate that and everything, but is FinCEN working on anything along those lines also to try and have kind of a regulatory guidance that broadly covers virtual currency, not as a money transmitter, but for what they are?
Well, I know that we're working on some guidance, and hopefully that will come out sometime soon. But I can tell you what we're also doing is we're working with the SEC and we're working with the CFTC so that we can also make sure that we're all in our right lanes in what we're doing, not only in the virtual currency area, but also in the technology area, to make sure that if there is some confusion about where these lanes should be, we get some kind of clarity out there for all of you. I think that's what we're all interested in. And to the extent that there is a lack of clarity in those areas, I'm happy to hear those comments from you, and we're happy to take them into consideration. But I think you're going to see, David, in this area, guidance coming out pretty regularly, particularly if there is a lack of clarity in that area. Look, I think it really is important, particularly in the job that I have and the job I think that my counterparts have and the other regulatory authorities, is to be clear in what we're asking you to do and to be clear in what the regulations we are. And to the extent that we can do that, that's what we're going to do. I'm not telling you we're always going to be perfect, and I'm not telling you we're always going to get it right, but we're certainly going to be very thoughtful in that process. And I understand that it means a lot to you for us to be clear and transparent in what we do, and that's what our attempt is going to be, particularly in this area. And I'll be frank with you, it's not an easy area. I mean, it's not. It's just not. I mean, it's one of those areas, for me, 53 years old, I sort of missed that generation, right? As all this is coming through on that, all sort of on the cyber side. But it is not an easy area, and we certainly are giving it a lot of thought and being very careful and deliberate in what we say about it and how we say it and how we regulate it.
Okay.
Also, I think that's important. There are so many things with respect to virtual currency that need to be considered, and so many of the different innovations that they have that perhaps can be used in other areas.
No, I mean, obviously we have to separate the technology from the virtual currency itself, because they are two completely different things.
That's right.
But
they may very well evolve together. So you certainly have to take a look at them.
But when you have one agency calling it a commodity, another calling it an investment, another saying, yes, it's a currency. And we have the example here in South Florida. We had a case, money laundering case on Miami Beach, which,
You got a money laundering case in Miami Beach?
can you believe that? It even happens on Miami Beach.
Any
Even on South
AUSAs
Beach.
here? I mean, write this down. I don't know.
It was in the paper, so it
It's in
had
the
to be
paper?
true.
Leaks.
The case was dismissed. The judge dismissed the case. He said it can't be money laundering because Bitcoin was involved, and Bitcoin is not money. Of course, the state of Florida, the legislature quickly rushed out
Of
a
course.
bill to try and dub Bitcoin as money. So if we're patching, it's a patchwork kind of process we're seeing here.
But don't you
Can
think-
we get together and decide, is it a commodity? Is it an investment? Is it a currency?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I mean, how many of you here in this room, a couple hundred? I'd love to hear what you have to say. What do you think? I mean, you guys are your industry, right? You see it every day. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on it. At the end of the day, we might agree. I don't know. We might disagree. But being educated by a group like this is going to be important for us at the end of the day. I think that's going to be, we cannot, decide this on our own. We certainly need to think about what everybody's experience is in it. I'm happy to listen.
By the way, it's actually
Couple
quite a
hundred?
bit more than a couple
Yeah?
hundred.
All right, sorry.
it's Like over 1,000, 1,200, 1,400.
That's impressive.
It's,
That's impressive.
they all came to see you.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
All the chairs are filled.
Yeah,
here,
I'm so sure.
On the other side of innovation, fintech.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conversation about that.
Yeah.
How
Yep.
are they regulated? Are
Yep.
they regulated?
Yep.
Should they be regulated like financial institutions? Do they require capital? Do they? And I know this is something that's being worked on by a lot of agency.
Working
But
hard
as
on
I
it.
tell Andrea, and I think I've told her in private conversations as well as yesterday in public conversations, my view of FinCEN is you are the FIU.
Yeah.
You are the setter, the trendsetter. You are the ones that are basically the keepers of the flame, so to speak, when it comes to
Yeah.
the anti-money laundering policy of the U.S. So I look to FinCEN
Yeah.
to understand what does FinCEN think that FinTech is and how FinTech should be regulated.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to say I agree with everything you say, but pretty much yes. I mean, I think that we have an obligation to be clear in this area, and I think it's sort of muddied in how we deal with it. As we learn it a little bit better, and as I learn it a little bit better, hopefully we'll get a little bit clearer. But I will say this, though, maybe much to the disappointment of some here. It is an exciting area, right? It is an innovative area that I think is going to help all of us. But we need to get a better handle on how we're going to regulate it and what it means, and what their responsibilities and obligations are. I can tell you I have some thoughts, pretty strong thoughts on that, but those are thoughts that need to be vetted very well with my staff and other people in the industry. I think that when you enter into this business, you're all in. That's what I think.
All right, because I had a proposal along those lines, because you talked about, everybody thinks the government has these vast resources to be able to face all
And
these
most
problems.
of you who worked in government know that that's not true, right? It's not, yeah.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. So let's take this area of FinTech or RegTech and all the innovation that it brings.
Yeah, both.
I was speaking at an event in Silicon Valley, and there was a representative from the San Francisco Fed on the panel with us. And I asked him, I said, how do you even contemplate validating these models? Do you have the resources? Do you have the expertise? And he said, I'm competing with Amazon, I'm competing with Google, I'm competing with Facebook
Yep.
for all of those resources.
Yep.
And obviously, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, it's a big challenge.
How can you face that same challenge if we have this issue of resources? How will you be able to validate, to evaluate these types of new and innovative processes?
Well, I'm not so sure we're doing it all by ourselves, right? I mean, I think that we're going to be doing it with them. I think we're going to be doing it with many of the people in this room. And again, at the end of the day, making a decision on what is right and what we need to do, I think is just a matter of being practical at the end of the day. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
So can we create a regulatory sandbox there where
Well, I think that
we can both?
I think that we've already been doing that. In fact, I think it was several weeks ago up in Washington, D.C., I gave some opening remarks to a BSAG group.
there.
We were there. And look, I asked them to do a couple of things. One is I challenged them all to be innovative, and I told them to be bold. And that's what we need to do. And I know I sort of go back to the phrase that I said earlier today, a few moments ago, we have to. We're at a stage right now that if we're not bold and innovative, we're going to get overwhelmed, and so we have to be. So that's the challenge I have for all of you, not only in the innovation sector, but also being creative in what we're talking about in our regulations and what we're talking about in our requirements for all of you. To give it some thought, we're always thinking, but in the fintech and regtech area, we have to be. We have to be in front of that wave at the end of the day. And I know that's easy to use those terms. It's hard to actually effectuate that. But that was the challenge that I gave that group. And that group seemed to be, my understanding is they were very vibrant conversations all day. They have some creative ideas that I'm waiting to see. And I'm hoping that they're bold at the end of the day. You'd be surprised what we would consider. And I think that we want to be pretty bold in what we consider and what we do at the end of the day. There are always risks when you do that. At the end of the day, it depends on how much risk you want to take, right? For us here at FinCEN and also for those in private industry. But sometimes you have to take that risk.
I can confirm that even though what happens at BSAG stays at BSAG, and we don't divulge any confidential information, but I can confirm that the conversation was rather vibrant, particularly, I think, at our table, right, Andrea, on some of these ideas. But I think
they have to be, David. I mean, it just has to be. These are important times. These are exciting times. And I think that we have the ability to be very creative, and we have the ability to be very innovative. It almost feels, and it's kind of bizarre to say, but it's not just me saying it. I think some of the bigger banks and some of the people that we've been working with, it just feels like all the planets have aligned, the right people are in place. It is time for us to be creative. It is time for us to be innovative, to perhaps try things that we've never tried before, things that maybe we've wanted to do before, but either we're too scared to do them or propose them. I think that this is the time to think about it.
Well, I think there you mentioned something very important, and it's part of what's going through in the regulatory reform in Congress. The bigger banks who may be more, and obviously are more well-equipped with their resources to be able to face this era of innovation. What happens to the smaller banks? What happens to the medium-sized banks, the community banks, if they're not able?
I think we need to find a way to bring them in, right? Look, we're very cognizant about that. When we have these conversations, we always talk about the smaller institutions, and we always talk about the mid-sized institutions, because you don't want to start implementing regulations or sending out advisories where it makes it impossible for them to comply. And that's certainly not what we want. But again, I throw this back to many of those institutions. You need to be heard, and you need to let us know what you think and how you feel and how it affects you at the end of the day. But I think it, particularly in the innovation side, in the fintech and the regtech area, I do think that there are ways that the bigger institutions can bring in the other institutions with them. I do think that there's a way to do it, and we should be having full and complete conversations with them about it.
Interesting idea. You large institutions, I see a couple of them sitting
Some of them
close
just
to me.
walked out.
How altruistic are you that you're going to bring in the smaller institutions under your arm and hand them this technology?
I didn't say under their arm.
Okay.
I didn't say under their arm. I mean, that's something that industry is going to have to talk about how they do it, right? But it's something that I think that we should have the conversation about how it gets done.
Okay, we're going to have that conversation amongst ourselves, and then we're going to come back with some thoughts in that area.
I'm happy to listen.
Okay. We have a few minutes left because I want to make sure you get on your plane.
Yeah, I like that little clock thing you have.
Because if not, I know you won't be in that chair next year if I don't get you to the airport on time. A lot of talk, of course, because we're in March. May is just around the corner, and we have the CDD rule finally being implemented. We had a pretty good discussion about that yesterday also, and we're going to have a further discussion where we have a panel dedicated solely to the CDD rule.
That's important.
We've been waiting a long time for it.
2 years or more. Right.
That's after the
Right.
passage. But
After the passage.
working
enough.
up to the passage, I can tell you that
Fair
your
enough.
predecessor sat in that chair 3 years in a row, and every time I asked her, when's it coming out, she would look and say, where's the camera? Soon, soon, with a nice smile on her face. And I kept saying, God, I'm just waiting for you to announce it right here, that it's coming out now. But we're finally there, and just my humble opinion, I feel that if Mossack and Fonseca hadn't come out, maybe the impulse wouldn't necessarily have been there. That's just my opinion, and it's okay.
It's an important case, right?
No, it is. So we discussed, and it was on the opening panel this morning, there's still clarity that is lacking there.
Right.
There are FAQs, which Andrea's been promising.
Yes.
Soon.
Soon.
May
Soon.
is right around the corner. I hope it's not going to be May 10th that the FAQs hit the wire. Not to put you on the spot and
Yeah.
not expecting that you're going to pull them out of your pocket now and say, here they are. But how soon will soon be? Because, here we have a head start.
Yeah, you do.
Miami has always been under the microscope. So when it comes to CDD,
Yeah.
I think we are the best.
That's
There
good.
is no doubt that we are the best. Give yourselves a round of applause. Absolutely. Yet we continue to be under that microscope and all those geographic targeting orders, which is fine. We understand. We are the innovators of AML.
Hey, look,
There's no
I'm a
doubt.
Miami kid. Everything, I love when you guys take credit for all this stuff, right? I love it.
Well, we should.
well, I'm not saying you shouldn't,
You
I'm
set the
just saying.
bar and we jump over it. Okay? It's always how high.
Yeah.
So I know
Yeah.
soon, and I'm not asking you to give me a day, but we need to have lead time.
So look, I can tell you that an FAQ I knew nothing about until 8 weeks ago. That's what I'm telling you. They will be out soon. They will be. I'm not going to give you a time frame, but let me tell you what the deliberative process is, right? Because I think it's important for you to understand why they're not out. There is a deliberative process involved of people taking a look at it, of it going back and forth, of people being thoughtful, of people giving advice. When we send something out, understanding it means something when we send something out. When we say something, it means something. So we want to make sure that what we tell you and the examples that we give and the things that we say, we feel 100% confident about. And that's a deliberative process. And once we finish that deliberative process, I can tell you, I asked about it just before I left yesterday. It is very close, and we'll be having out for you soon. You have guidance that we've given out in this area, and I understand that it's never enough, and you want more. I would imagine that when we send out the FAQs, when they come out again, you're going to want more. And we will try and provide you with clarity as we go through the process. It's an important process for us. It's an important rule for us. Frankly, it's an important rule for all of us, for you too, at the end of the day. So we want to make sure that we get it right.
No, and we appreciate that. And as you said, you always appreciate feedback.
I do.
We can't provide the feedback until we see them. And as I said, the concern is if they're May 10th, it doesn't give us much time to give you feedback. If there's something perhaps that is of extreme importance that maybe needs to be fixed or needs to be tweaked.
Yeah.
So, Andrea, can you get to work
part
on
of
that, please, and get that?
Part of that, and although I don't want to promise anything, we want to be flexible on our side too at the end of the day.
Okay. It's ticking very fast there.
I saw that.
I know. It's terrible.
I got a car waiting.
You're only, it's going to give you a short time to answer this, and this was a debate we had yesterday.
Maybe that's a good thing.
I think it will be. I think it will be. We had this issue, public-private partnership information sharing, which we think is extremely important.
It is.
And the original ask to Congress after the CDD rule was passed was for a central repository for all beneficial ownership in the U.S. at Treasury. My question had always been, that's fine. Are you going to share that with the banks? And the answer was no. So here we go again. You'll be the repository. You'll have the information. We'll be trying to kill ourselves to get that information. What happens when it doesn't match?
So look, I wish I could say that I was an expert in that whole area that you discussed. I'm not. I know that there's some legislation, and I've reviewed it all and given it a lot of thought, and that I don't think that we yet are where we want to be in order to comment on the legislation. I think it's, you know, a long time coming. It needs to get done. But I don't want to get out in front of me and make a comment that later on I'll have to take back. So certainly that's something that I'll think about when you talk about a central repository of what information there is and what the bank should or should not have access to. I will tell you up front, I have a lot of concern about central repositories. I do. I just do. I do. I think, you know, the American public and all the public has a right to privacy, and I want to make sure that we adhere to that. I want to make sure that we're very clear about that. That is really important to me. What's also really important to me is that the public understand that when we have this information, we are damn sure that we secure it in a way that it needs to be secured, bottom line, and that we use it and that access only gets to it by people who must have it for a particular, really good reason at the end of the day. So when I hear issues of commingling information and putting it in one place and access, I got to tell you something. There better be real clear SOPs on what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it and who's doing it and what is done with it before I agree to it. And then if you think the process is deliberative, that will be a very deliberative process for us at FinCEN, and I think for a number of other people. But I just want to make sure that we are clear and accurate at what we do when we guard people's information, banking information.
Well, I know you see it hit 0.
I saw that.
I know the engine's running outside.
But there was
I know
no
your
confetti
bag
that
is
came
set.
down.
We haven't reached the confetti part yet.
All right, fair
Maybe
enough.
next year we'll have confetti come down. But I think, you know, for me, the takeaway, and again, appreciate you stopping on your way down, take Mon. I know how busy the schedule is, and
Yep.
especially you're, you know, just 8 weeks in the chair, and obviously you haven't had the time to see everything. So I appreciate you coming and sharing your opinions with us. My biggest takeaways, and I think it's, I'm an optimist, just
Good,
so
me
you
too.
know. So all in this together, practical, clear and transparent.
Yeah.
I don't think the industry could really ask for anything more. And I will give you as my final word, of course, is, and we'll hold you to that.
And I'll hold you to that too at the end of the day. So thank
Great.
you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, buddy.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.